Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brave and Dentsu Aegis Network virtual event titled Future Proof Your Marketing, Advertising in a Cookieless World. My name is Amy Siegel, VP Director of Digital at Dentsu Aegis Network, and today I am joined by Brendan Ike, Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Johnny Ryan, Chief Policy Officer, and Donnie DeVoren, Head of Sales from Brave Software. So, over the next 45 minutes or so, we will be talking about the most pressing issues facing the advertising industry today, ranging from policy and privacy consideration from both a consumer and agency point of view. And we'll be talking through some of the innovative solutions that have proven to be successful throughout. So, we will first start off with Brendan Ike, the CEO and co founder of Brave Software, who will talk to us about Brave and his high level vision for the company and its mission. Then we'll jump over to Dr. Johnny Ryan, an industry expert on user data privacy and policy, on what we really need to be considering as agencies and brand marketers. Then Donnie DeVoren, head of sales, will answer questions on specific media tactics that help get results in a privacy respecting way. So let's get started. So, Brendan, we know that Brave has really been your baby for the last 5+ years. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about Brave?
Sure. So I have to go back further in time to tell the story right. I started at Netscape in early April 1995. Netscape was a year old or so then, and I foolishly not joined them at the beginning when I could have. I came a year late, and I was tempted to come to a programming language in the browser that you could write directly in the HTML. So Mark Andreessen was the sort of executive sponsor of that idea, but it immediately fell into the sidekick role versus the Java programming language. And we ended up naming my language JavaScript. It was called Mocha originally. And the reason I'm telling you this is because JavaScript took over the web. It even went from the client side into the server side, and it became endemic, and it became very useful for tracking and targeting for ad tech. So after many other turns and twists in my career, mostly still at Netscape and then founding Mozilla and doing Firefox, I came to realize the browser was this sort of passive runtime, this sort of servant of JavaScripts that were being loaded from different websites. And a lot of them were not websites you would ever visit. So you go to a publisher and suddenly you're being assailed by scripts from ad tech vendors that are embedded in the publisher's website, or they're loaded from other scripts that load from other scripts, sort of like fleas, little ones on the backs of big ones, all the way down to the website. And you don't know what these things are doing to your system. They're measuring you. They're able to identify you as you browse across different unrelated sites. And in realizing that JavaScript had become, among other things, an enabler of this technology, I wanted to do something about it. So I thought, there are people who block tracking, and there are good extensions, and some browsers may even do this, though when we started Brave, it wasn't normal for browsers to block tracking. So I wanted to build a browser that would protect people from this kind of privacy invading sort of surveillance that was not just bad for users. It was loading a lot of scripts that was running your radio and draining your battery. It was facilitating the distribution of malware in ad exchanges, believe it or not. When Brave launched beta in early 2016, in March of that year, malware had made its way through ad exchanges onto the front of the New York Times and America Online, BBC, other sites. And this was, I guarantee you, the malware distributors had no business relationship with those publishers. How did they do this? They did it through the magic of ad tech, ad exchanges, and JavaScript. And so Brave's mission is not just to protect users from that, but then to build a clean alternative for fans and readers to fund their favorite creators and publishers. And that we did with the basic attention token, cryptocurrency. And we've had growth every month since we started, and we're still finding success. And I think also the world has changed. Privacy law and regulation, and a move toward tracking protection on by default, and other browsers who followed our lead on this show that we're on the right path.
Definitely. So, how did you originally come up with the idea for Brave?
When I realized that all browsers that ran JavaScript were running these ad tech scripts, I thought, why should browsers be working for the user's adversary? In many cases, it is the adversary because it's loading malware in the worst case. But if it's just raiding your data for some privacy loss and to help place ads on publisher sites, is that really bad? Well, it turns out, having started talking to publishers in, I think, as early as 2013, I can talk to Jim Spanfeller, former Forbes publisher, and I realized the publishers aren't benefiting from this system either because it's so indirect that the audience for a particular publisher can be sort of tracked and then sort of stolen away by cheaper publishers or even ad fraud sites, that there's a sort of race to the bottom effect where publishers lose revenue year over year, and the gross revenue that the advertisers spend gets cut down by all the ad tech intermediaries, so that what's left in the publisher's pie tin is a, a small slice. And so I thought, if you get rid of those intermediaries, you protect the user's privacy, you save battery and data plan, you make pages load faster. You also help the publisher if you can reconnect the reader or the fan to the creator more directly with fewer intermediaries, maybe just the browser as the intermediary. And that led to the idea of using cryptocurrency, because once you've blocked all the tracking that targets and confirms ads, you've kind of cut the old world of payments that are made through invoicing and 30 or 90-day net invoicing and bank relationships between the ad tech vendors and the publishers. You have to reconnect the payment rails, and the way to do it directly in the browser, the only really practical way, is with cryptocurrency. So that's what we did. And so if you think about Google and other big ad tech players, among other things, that's what Google is, as sort of complex cloud-based surveillance systems that optimize and track and target and also take heavy fees. Once you think about blocking those systems, you have to sort of turn that system upside down and start from the minimum required software, which is the browser. And in the browser, you can do a lot. You can mediate cryptocurrency payments. You can do local machine learning and studies of the user data that originates in everyone's browser. Everyone navigates, everyone types search queries, everyone fills in e-commerce forms and submits them to buy things. And your browser is your trusted agent. I don't care which browser it is, you have to trust it to get that right. You have to make sure it's going to the right website and it's showing you that it's got a lock icon, which should mean it's a secure connection. If you trust your browser, and the browser can do a lot of the studying of your behavior to match ads privately, then you don't need the big cloud systems. They might add some value for somebody, but it's clear over time they've become a negative for the user and for a lot of publishers. So we've stood the whole model upside down and shaken out all the bugs and parasites in the middle. And what's left really is the user using a browser, the publisher or creator. We support YouTubers and others. And of course, the advertisers, the buy side, because we value advertising as a way to support creators. If users had to pay directly in a subscription model or a Patreon model for every bit of content they read, I think the web would collapse, because you just look at the amount of ad gross spend, right? 330 billion. You're not going to replace that with voluntary contributions or subscriptions overnight. We'd like to see more subscriptions over time, but it's going to take years.
No, that makes sense. And I feel like you've really been able to showcase all of those great benefits. Why do you feel Brave is more relevant than ever today?
Since we started early enough to get expertise in how to protect users without making the web malfunction, sometimes when you use an ad blocker, or really what we are, a tracking protection system, you block enough JavaScript that there's a false positive. You block something you shouldn't have, or maybe you block a script that's both good and bad. It's doing some targeting and tracking and surveillance, but it's also making the site operate properly. So we've learned how to cope with these problems and make the web work with tracking protection on. And this is an ongoing research program that we've, I think, pursued in the open with open source and open publication, and that's been influential on other projects. So we collaborate now in the standards bodies with Apple and Mozilla and others to advance privacy as part of the web standards, as something that web standards have to satisfy in order to become standards, that they cannot just say, oh, we'll do privacy later, or nobody cares about this privacy leak because it's only a little bit, because those add up over time, and pretty soon you're being fingerprinted with a full identifier. So we found that by getting in there early and getting users and following our nose with our users, growing every month, we've been in a great position to lead the market and lead the standards, and that's what we're doing now.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Okay, so Johnny, as we move on to you, what should marketers be on the lookout for as we transition to a cookieless world? So how
Yeah,
can marketers really start to grapple with privacy and determine whether they are legally exposed in any way by what a partner or a publisher might be doing?
thanks, Amy. I think this is the critical question. What agencies and marketers both often find difficult to fully encompass in their minds is that it might seem that when you buy media, you're going directly to a publisher. But of course, we know, if we think about it, that there's this chain of companies in between us and the media owner that we're buying from. And so when we buy that media through that chain, we are actually involved legally in what is done with the data by that chain. Now, we may not know about all of the companies that are involved in this process, but unfortunately, they do expose us. So now we're 2 years in to the GDPR era, and I think people are starting to try to figure out how to get on the right side of compliance here. Now, what's fortunate is that the GDPR text actually contains a tool that I think should be the starting point for any marketer and for any agency. One cannot know what one should do unless one first uncovers what one's current situation is. What are the risks I'm exposed to? What are the problems? And there's a tool in Article 85 of the GDPR called the Data Protection Impact Assessment. And that tool is actually very useful for brands. So if we go to Article 35, I'm just going to scroll down here. We're looking at the actual text of the GDPR. If we look at Article 35.3a, you see that this tool is supposed to be used when you are involved in profiling data and when you're using or involved in the use of automated data processing. So for example, programmatic advertising would certainly be covered, as would most conventional ad tech. And the tool is also used when, or must be used, when you're dealing with what's called special category data. Special category data are protected things like your ethnicity, health, sexual orientation, faith, all of those things. Now, the tool is specified in Article 35, in Article 35.7, and I'm scrolling down so you can see what the instructions for using this tool are. And again, this is in the actual text of the GDPR. It's a very, very practical assessment so that marketers and their agencies can understand the degree of exposure that they have to their vendors. And when you go through these items, you see actually, if one undertook this exercise, one could not be in a position of not understanding the risks that one was then exposed to. It's quite a detailed thing. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but I'll add one final thing, Amy. Once one has gone through this exercise, it is inevitable that one will uncover risks. And if one is not in a position to completely mitigate those risks, then Article 36 requires that you engage with your enforcer, whichever your local enforcer is, and get advice from them. So there's a clear pathway here in the text of the GDPR in Articles 35 and 36 for all brands to understand exactly where they stand and what their exposure might be.
It's a lot of good information to understand. So, Johnny, what is on your mind as the next big development in privacy?
We are having the GDPR, and there was a lot of focus on the CCPA in California. But what people have not yet started to think about is what is coming after November, and that is the California Privacy Rights Act, the CPRA. In November, there will be a referendum in the state of California, and on the ballot will be, for the first time ever, a text that will put in law a definition of what cross-context behavioral advertising is. Now, to the best of my knowledge, this has never been done before. So a legal definition of cross-context behavioral advertising, that is quite a novel thing. And it means there is no wriggle room for our colleagues in the tracking industry or the advertising industry here. The CCPA created a lot of opportunity to avoid the law, let's say, because it focused on the idea of the sale of data. So if one could say, I'm an ad tech company and I share data, but I don't sell it, then you could kind of get out from underneath the CCPA. But not only does this new act coming after November, not only does it define cross-context behavioral advertising, it also broadens the definition of the use of data beyond sales. So you'll see it includes sharing, share, disclosing, disseminating, and so forth. That means there is no wiggle room for the industry. Everyone who is caught by this text is going to be forced to address it in a way that they were not forced to address the CCPA. This is the much stronger successor proposed actually by the same people. Now, I keep saying this is coming in November, there'll be a vote on it. So of course, the question is, how many people will say yes? How many will say no? The answer is, according to polling, 88% of people will say yes. Only 4% will say no. So, Amy, I think this Californian initiative is going to force many of our colleagues on the vendor side of the ad business who provide services to brands. It's going to force them to finally make the privacy shift that they have not yet had to because of a lack of GDPR enforcement.
Wow. So this is huge, right? I mean, this is going to be a big deal.
I think it is going to be a big deal, yes.
A huge deal. So what should we as marketers and agencies do to prepare for this privacy shift?
That's the question. I mean, in a way, that's the reason why Brave exists. But let's take it away from Brave for a moment because it's a big, broad question for everybody. As marketers and agencies, we are like drivers of cars. And the question is, are those cars dirty or are they clean? There is a general trend in our industry now, in the data and advertising and online media industry. There's a general trend to clean tech. And it's like the eco movement, right? We've seen it with big polluters. We've seen it with cars. Let's take the car analogy, Amy. We are used to these things. We're very happy with them. We would drive them until the world burned, but the negative externalities are such that eventually, a lawmaker comes in and says, you just can't keep driving these things. And so a new category of vehicle enters the market, whether people wanted it or not. It turns out that they very much did want it. Tesla is the poster child for that movement. The same thing has happened or is happening in the online advertising movement. We have a dangerous system that misuses personal data by leaking it out all over the place and exposing people to the profiling and tracking that Brendan was describing. But at the same time, there's a reform movement that is introducing the safe use of data. And I want to wrap up this answer by giving you two models. This is the normal model. This is conventional ad tech. This is what a bid request would look like, for example, in normal real-time bidding. You take the person's data and you fling it as far out as possible to try to solicit the most number of bids. Now that's a real problem because it exposes the brand and the agency to enormous risk, and it exposes the user to profiling by innumerable parties. Model 2 is the exact opposite. In Model 2, the first thing you do, in the Brave model anyway, is you let the person decide whether to opt in or not. If they then opt in, then you use machine learning on the device to deliver the most sophisticated targeting that you can get in today's market or in tomorrow's market. And it's based only on what the device itself can learn about the person. And the device can know more than any third party ever could. So what you have is a kind of a spam filter showing this person only the offers that are relevant to them based on what the device itself learns about them. And the beauty is that the data never leave the device. And here is how that works. When I've opted in, all of my data is gathered up into a very, very detailed profile of what I do, when I do it, across most of my behavior on the device, because the browser generally sees all. Now, at a certain point during the day, a catalog of potential offers is sent to my device, and my device, knowing me as intimately as it does, and knowing my daily schedule, decides what to show me and when to show it to me. The data never leave the device, and yet I'm seeing relevant ads in a way that I could not otherwise. I think for marketers, whether you take Brave's particular version of this or someone else's, I think Brave's is the best. This model of edge computing, rather than the broadcast model, is one that they have to start exploring.
Great. Thank you, Johnny. Super helpful.
Okay, thank you.
So, Donnie, as we move on to hearing a little bit more about Brave, we've heard a lot about what you can do and marketing in a cookieless world. But what are the specific media tactics that marketers can use within the Brave platform?
That is a great question. So I think the best way to do this is to oversimplify it and talk about two specific advertising products that we have. So let's start with the top of the funnel. And what I mean by that is our big brand awareness units. And this one's called a sponsored image. You can think of it as sponsoring the browser or a new tab sponsorship. And it actually shows up when somebody clicks a new tab. And so you can see the left an example for eToro on an iPhone, and on the right on a desktop computer. And this unit specifically is very clean advertising product, as Johnny was just mentioning. It's extremely brand safe. It's not near any other content or news that's on the website. It's completely, cookieless. So we're talking about cookieless marketing today. So there's no third-party cookies. You can see example for Home Depot here. You can see something that we did with Verizon and Dave Matthews when he was live streaming from his attic. Chipotle is a great example. They were all about in this, COVID world, telling consumers that they now have $1 delivery. You can see an extension called Honey. Hopefully we'll call it a Brave extension versus a Chrome extension. And this is available internationally. So you buy by country, and you're the only advertiser in that country at any one time. And we sell this by the day. And this is an example of Gillette running in Japan only for a couple days. And another example would be BlockFi over here. So I mentioned there's two advertising products. One that's kind of in the middle would be our trading widget, which you'll see right here for Binance, where you can actually execute trades. But let me go to the second advertising product. So this one is called User Ads, and it's a push notification. And so with this one specifically, I'm on on the Brave browser, and I type in mortgage rates, and you can see that I click on a link for 10 best mortgage rates. And I am on that screen right here. It's top10.com. But what you saw on the bottom right-hand corner is a home loan ad from Bank of America. And that was a notification that I received because I'm in market for mortgage rates. And again, this is, complements nicely what Johnny said, that all of this data is being kept on my device, but the browser sees everything, and it's not being pushed out to the rest of the ad ecosystem. And then I would click on that, and it would go right to the Bank of America website. And there's a number of other examples. Let's say I'm into, cryptocurrencies, and I go to CoinMarketCap, and this is the example for eToro on a Mac with a push notification in the upper right. And then I go to the eToro website, and just to show you how it looks on iPhones, I go over here and I'm typing luxury car reviews, and I click on the link, and I go to Alfa Romero website. I see an ad for Audi and go to the Audi site, and then finally on Android. So those are the units to really consider. One is the sponsored image, or that new tab sponsorship. And the second one that I showed right here is the push notifications.
Awesome. So a lot of super unique ad formats to take advantage of. So Donnie, when you're thinking about this audience, what makes this audience so unique and potentially unreachable within other media formats?
Yeah, that's a good question. So let me start talking about the audience demographics that we're seeing of this user, and then I'll get into kind of why they're, unreachable. And so, we've done a lot of surveys to our users, and we've simply asked them the question, and they complete the survey and they tell us about themselves. And what they've told us is that most of them, over 3/4 of them, are 21 to 49 years old. They're millennials. They do skew on the male side, but that's changing over time as we get more and more users. And their income is quite high. So, a quarter of them making $100,000 plus a year. And as far as their attributes go, they're into personal finance, they're into crypto. A lot of them consider themselves early tech adopters. If you look at the bottom area, 1 in 4 Brave users consider themselves, gamers. They're also responsible for software and hardware purchases. And why they're really unreachable elsewhere is that we've asked them, what percent of the time are you using the Brave browser? And they said that 75% of the time they're using the browser. They're not using other browsers. And our browser, when it blocks the pixels and the third-party cookies and the trackers, it also blocks the programmatic ads. It also blocks the YouTube ads. So they're not seeing programmatic ads. They're not seeing YouTube ads. If they are using another browser, that 25% of the time, 6 in 10 of them have told us that they're using an ad blocker. And then if you look at some of the stats on the bottom of the screen, 80% of them do not watch ad-supported TV, so they're cord cutters. Only 50% of them are on Facebook, and only 1/3 of them use, social media like Snapchat, TikTok, Reddit. So in a nutshell, they're extremely hard to reach with other digital media today.
That makes sense. And I know you mentioned you guys are gaining a lot of traction in the marketplace. So what type of growth are you seeing with your users and also advertisers?
Yeah, it's a really good question. The growth is hot. The growth is really good. So I'll answer this in a couple different ways. So I joined the company about a year ago, and we had 5 million users, and you can see that on the bottom stat. You fast forward 12 months later, and we have 15.5 million users. So we're growing just under 1 million users a month. We've tripled the number of users. I can't tell the future, but if you look at the trend line, it's looking really, really solid. That will cross over 22 million users by the end of the year. And I think from an advertising and marketing perspective, it's important to think about, the number of impressions you can reach in the US. And, we've crunched the numbers, and we have over 200 million available monthly US impressions. And I think another part that is, just to talk about the growth for another second, is the amount of publishers that have opted in to receive the basic attention token. So as a user, you get rewarded for your attention like a frequent flyer mile, and you can earn anywhere from $5 to $10 a month, and then you can go and tip content creators. And there's over, nearly 800,000 different content creators that have verified their website or their channels to accept this form of currency. So in a nutshell, we're seeing great user growth from users and also content creators and publishers.
Awesome. So it's great to hear about the really strong momentum out the gate. So do you have any specific success stories that you can share from advertisers that you've partnered with?
Sure. Yeah. Great question. So, overall, we've seen a really, really strong click-through rate. We're averaging around 9%. And if you compare it to, the left side, Google Display and Facebook and Google Search, I mean, this is leaps and bounds better. So that's, a good place to start. More specifically, I show the example of eToro, which is a stock and crypto exchange, them using the sponsored image and the push notification. But if you can draw your eyes to the chart on the right, the purple line is the number of registrations to their exchange we were providing them using our push notifications. And the 2 red spikes are the days where they added the sponsored image, that image that I showed with Home Depot and Chipotle. And so when those 2 units are used in conjunction, it's incredibly powerful for a brand, and that's from a cost per acquisition CPA standpoint. And then, something else to show you is, Upland. They are a crypto company that actually is similar to like a monopoly, and you buy virtual land. And when they looked at the revenue per user and spending and using their game from Facebook over to Brave, with us, they saw a 3x value of that user. And there's a number of different case studies with direct-to-consumer brands. This brand called Culprit, they saw 5x in sale. Nexo is another area in the crypto, but we have a lot of mainstream advertisers as well. But just one here is that what I liked about this campaign was it wasn't just about getting user acquisition. It was having people donate to Save the Children. They ran with 1 day with us, and they raised over $25,000 a day. And I'll just finish by saying that we have a full dashboard that advertisers can see the data.
Awesome. It's really, really great to see all of that strong momentum and proof of performance. So keep up the good work.
Thanks. And so I just have, if I could turn the table just for a quick second, Amy, you've been, a great partner of Brave. And I'd love to know, going back, a year ago, what really piqued your interest in Brave?
Yeah, good question. So I would say that a lot of it is things that we've already mentioned today, but there were two strong driving forces behind why our agency teams were really excited about rallying around the idea of activating on Brave. And I would say those are number one, that opportunity to engage with an otherwise unreachable audience, to what you mentioned before. We know that Brave was really unique in that the majority of your user base, as you mentioned, that 70%, cannot be found on a lot of our other browsers or platforms. And the fact is that these tech savvy individuals who are generally more averse to traditional forms of advertising and are trying to steer clear of tracking are on Brave. And we knew that we really had that opportunity to engage with them in a big way with our activations. And number two, I would say, is we know that when a user does engage with branded content on Brave, it's because they've really opted in to do so. They've truly raised their hand and said, yes, we're interested. We want to engage with your content. We see the value in branded content that Brave is serving them. And whether that be in the form of value exchange formats or otherwise, we know that we're really alleviating any sort of wasted media impressions or dollars that other opportunities may really not be reaching, and really making sure that we're alleviating that waste and going after that person that's saying, yes, I'm interested and I'm here for it.
That's great. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for being such an awesome partner. I'm sure we wanted to, open up to any questions that came in, but I'll turn it back to you, Amy. Thank you.
Okay, so question for you, Donnie. So if you block all trackers and pixels, how do we as brands ever get that opportunity to measure performance and see that proof of performance while talking to our customers?
Yeah, that's a really good question that comes up a lot in meetings. Like if we're blocking all the trackers, and tracking doesn't just mean targeting to consumers, it also means tracking performance. How do you do that? So there's a number of different ways. I won't get into all of them, but the biggest ones is, number one, Brave has its own ads dashboard. And in that dashboard, you can see everything from views, clicks. We offer unique metrics like the amount of clicks that end up users spend like 10 seconds or more on the landing page. And then we also see conversions. Like the browser knows that a user doesn't know a lot about the user, but it knows that the user saw an ad or clicked on an ad and also saw a thank you page. And then it matches it up and says, okay, we got you, 100 conversions or whatever it is. Now, on our client sides, they can do a lot of things. They can set up a unique, UTM parameter in the URL that says, UTM equals Brave, and they can track on their side. What we don't allow is a Google Analytics redirect or a DCM tag that would basically, track users from the Google side. And we also have things like a server-to-server ping back where we can basically put the data inside of Google Analytics. And there's things like offer codes that brands can do. So we have a series, we have like a one sheet that goes through a series of different options that's really satisfied brands.
I wanted to add something real quick. Thanks, Donnie. That we blind ourselves to the user identity too. So it's not like we're holding any secret data. This is all done through Privacy Pass, which you may have heard of. Cloudflare and Google have standardized this. It's based on blind signatures. but it does allow us to make some useful reporting, which Donnie described. And so we think the aggregate and the sort of campaign and conversion attribution is important, but it does not require linkability to a user identifier. And that's the problem we're solving by blocking all that tracking in the first place.
And Amy, can I add something as well?
Of course.
Yeah. When a person clicks a Brave ad, that does not mean that the brand cannot talk to that person and develop a relationship with them. So Brave protects the person from third-party tracking. But if you've clicked an ad and said you are interested in the offer, and the offer requires you to share more information, of course, you can decide to do that. So Brave is not standing in between brands and their own customers or brands and prospective customers. It's actually bringing them together when the customer wants that to happen.
In a big, beautiful tab that you open from the notification. Yeah, we love direct relationships, and we want the brand and the user to develop as direct a relationship as possible.
Yeah, that's helpful context. Thank you both. So Brendan, back to you. What was the biggest challenge that Brave really had to overcome, and how do you feel like you were able to overcome that? Like, what was that big moment where you're like, we're here?
Gosh, there are several, but I'll list a few and then pick the big one I see. So obviously, getting users and keeping them is challenging work in itself. Raising the right amount of capital, not too much, to actually make it to scale is hard. But the biggest one I think is, getting our message out so that people can see that there's a better way, and we're not, just trying to talk out of both sides of our mouth. And for me, the way this came to fruition did involve, like, Donnie and his team actually getting real sales and driving those sales numbers up month over month, because that shows that there is value in the new approach, that between the rising consciousness of privacy by users and regulators and brands and publishers, that we can find a better model and prove it to the world. And that's what we're doing. And so it's hard work. It wasn't easy to convince people, well, we're not just an ad blocker or, some old category that publishers came to hate because they felt it was depriving them of revenue, or brands felt was their enemy. That people will assert their right to block tracking, and that will have collateral damage to a great many ads, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a better way to do advertising. Getting that message across, which might sound like a contradiction at first, and showing people, not just telling them, but showing them a working product, was, I think, the hardest thing about Brave.
That makes sense. And I know from an agency perspective, obviously we're very focused on being client driven. And the way we're thinking about the demise of the cookie and regulations for CCPA and GDPR, we're keeping those conversations very separate. At the end of the day, of course, we're not ad tech companies, we're not publishers, we're just trying to do what makes sense for our brands. So Johnny, from your perspective, it seems like there is a lot of regulation that we should all be considering for that future date. Why should we be concerned now, and what does this mean for us today?
The advertising industry has a long, storied history, and the winners have always been prepared for disruptions when they come and could take advantage of them, Amy. Dentsu did not get to be Dentsu without doing this. So when radio came, when TV came, when color TV came, as outdoor changed, and so on, there is an inevitable privacy shift coming. It's coming from at least two directions. The first is regulation. That's a guarantee. It's already happening. The second is technology. Browsers are changing. Brave is at the forefront, but now and Safari's been pushing it for a long time, and now you're even seeing Google play catch up in a few years from now and introduce basic protections that have been standard on other browsers. So the third-party cookie we know is going away. To not use that information would be madness. But there's a third vector that is forcing this shift, and that is that people seem to be, to some extent, rebelling against tracking too. And if you look at the stats on the number of people blocking tracking or blocking some form of ads that involves tracking, it is an exponential curve that you would love to be your quarterly results. If we were all doing as well as the rebellion against tracking was doing, we'd be doing really, really, really well. So first, it's essential to get ahead of that movement. But second, failing to do so exposes us to legal hazard that we do not want to be exposed to. It also makes very likely the possibility that a moment will come and we're not prepared for it and we've lost all of our reach. All of our reach. That's not sustainable.
Thanks, Johnny. So a lot to pay attention to now and in the future.
Absolutely.
So thank you, everybody, and thanks to all of our speakers who joined us today and the great questions from the audience. I think that we just really want to thank everyone for participating. Obviously, this virtual event is new for a lot of us, but had a great opportunity. So thank you all for joining. And for the audience, if you have any other questions or information, please go to brave.com. And if you have any other pressing questions coming out of the session, feel free to contact adsales@brave.com, and we'll look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks.
Bye now.